Hello, in the last year I've been fortunate enough to see my YouTube channel more than double in size, a bit like my waistline. And the more it grows, the more I realise that there could be hundreds, if not thousands of new subscribers out there that don't know the true history of YouTube sensation Lawrence Brown. 278 billion years ago in 2005, I graduated from Lancaster University, and for my American viewers, that's not Lancaster, Pennsylvania, but the city after which it was named, in Lancashire, England. And after graduating, like all other graduates, I had a choice. Do I immediately enter the world of work, or do I continue to stave off reality by auditioning for the university's Amateur Dramatic Society? I chose the latter. And I know what you're thinking, Lawrence, it's okay, we all make daft decisions from time to time. But the truth is, that was one of the best decisions I've ever made, even though nobody wanted to hire me for 4 years. And that's because during auditions, I met my future American wife while she was studying abroad. Now, the funny thing is, prior to this, she'd had an equally challenging dilemma: study abroad in India or study abroad in England. Now, obviously, it doesn't take a DC, that's Detective Constable, to work out that she chose England. But ultimately, my decision to stay on in Lancaster and my wife's decision to study there set in motion the wheels of our eventual move to the United States. But here's a thought experiment. What if I'd given up amateur dramatics, entered the world of work, and never met that particular future wife? I'm not suggesting there were other future wives. I said I'm not she's left the building. And what if she'd chosen India thousands of miles away? We might never have met or happened upon the collective decisions that we made or didn't make. In other words, what if we, and therefore I, never moved to the United States? Funnily enough, this is a question I've asked in a public sphere before. In 2015, I penned an article in which I speculated on all of the things I would have missed out on. But this was early 2015. I hadn't yet launched my YouTube channel and learned all of the thousands of things I've since learned about the United States, such as the fact that there are 4 states that you can visit within seconds of each other, or that the nation's oldest fast food burger joint is White Castle. A significant amount more of America has entered my life since I wrote that article, and if I were to write that article today, it would be 10 times as long, and the editor would hate me. But if I hadn't moved to America, here's what I do know. Firstly, even if I'd lived the rest of my life in England, I still would have had a fascination with the United States of America, because I'd had that fascination since I was in the womb. Seriously, I could hear my mum watching reruns of Who Shot JR, and so I'm sure it would have continued to be a casual hobby of mine, but I wouldn't have had the context in my own life to turn this fascination into a career. A very public career in which 254,000 people tune in to hear me talk about it. I think to English living Lawrence, that would have seemed like a very unlikely avenue of work. Whereas, as everybody knows, there's total job security in amateur dramatics. And even though I would have retained that interest in all things America, there are certain things you only learn by living in another country. Take, for instance, time zones, right? In the UK, the only time that we have to worry about time zone differences is when we're going on holiday to Mallorca. In America, I've worked in jobs where I've conference called, and I can't believe I'm about to say this, with 6 different time zones, and they're all within the United States. And you have this sort of mild dilemma within American office settings, where someone says, do we tell them 7 a.m. their time or 8 a.m. our time? And my question is always the same. Why are we having a meeting at 8 a.m.? And while we're on the subject of the world of work, there's another thing they do in the United States called a potluck. And this is where employees each bring in an item of food, and we all share in the collective collection. But here's the thing, there are going to be some Americans watching this thinking, I don't call that a potluck, I call it a pitch-in, or a Jacob's join, or a fuddle. What's a fuddle? The point is, the United States is teeming with linguistic diversity. If I'd never moved here and if I'd never gone on to study all of this as part of my channel, I suspect that I'd still be of the mindset that, for example, the United States is made up of only 3 accents. General American, the South, and Carl Sagan. I think I'd believe a lot of myths about America. For example, that all Americans are loud and boisterous. Some people can be quiet. Some people can be reserved. There are actual reserved Americans. You don't hear about them because they don't make the news. Living in another country, especially a bigger country, really changes your perspective on size. Like, for instance, I used to think that 3 inches was huge, but also that 200 miles was a long way. Actually, come to that 1,000 miles was a long way. But living here in Chicago, it's about 1,000 miles up to the northeast, which when you look at an American map, that's barely any of the United States. It's vast, and I think that the majority of British people instinctively know it's vast by looking at a map. But I really believe that you don't get a true sense of its size until you've actually lived here. And then you get used to it. And you start to view the UK in the same way that you view the Vatican City, except it has 70 million people and no one can move. So these are just a handful of the thousands of things that I would never have learned. But I also wouldn't have met as many Americans. And don't get me wrong, Americans visit Britain all the time, but like with Florida Man stories, that's only a tiny snapshot of what Americans are actually like. Let me rephrase that. Most Americans aren't like Florida Man, even Joe Exotic, but that's only because he was from Oklahoma. Speaking of people, I don't think I would have been treated the same if I'd have remained in England. There's no escaping the fact that occasionally Americans will give me the royal treatment. Ooh, I love your accent. I've always wanted to see New Zealand. Or, ooh, could I stick you in a corner and listen to you speak on repeat until the end of time? And that was just a county judge, right? And I can get away with things being British in America that you couldn't in Britain. For instance, in my first American job, a customer just decided to ask me about all of the swear words that we use in Britain. And here I was with complete abandon just casually saying them back to him. So you've got bollocks, wanker, wazzock and Phil Collins, and not a single person reprimanded me. If I'd never moved to America, there's a lot of functional, everyday things that I would have just continued doing the same way for the rest of my life. Now, don't get me wrong, all of these are embarrassingly trivial things. But take, for instance, being on the road. Not only do we drive on the left, but you have the steering wheel on the right. And given the widespread access to public transportation in the United Kingdom, it's very likely that in this scenario, I wouldn't learn to drive. I haven't learned to drive in America either. And so because of this, I'd spend the rest of my life entering the passenger side on the left and not the right. And what about writing letters, right? People surely still do that. They don't, okay. Even so, something as simple as where you put the date and the address on the letter itself, not to mention the envelope, is simply not the same. And if you want to know more about that, I did do a video called 5 Ways That British and American Mail is Very Different. I do wonder if my personality has been slightly tweaked since I moved here. And not in a sort of dystopian way where I've had my brain manipulated by AI, but just sort of metaphorically through osmosis. Like, Americans might have a certain way about them that perhaps British people don't. You know, after about 5 years of living in America, I eventually stopped apologizing for everything. Oh, did I say I wanted pickles? I meant I wanted no pickles. I'm sorry you misheard me. I got that out of my skin. You know, I think things are way more direct now. Like, I hate pickles. And I do think that people let go of former neuroses simply by aging. But it does help that you're aging around people who sort of give you permission to do that because they're doing the exact same thing. And so a big question for this internet prodigy would be, if you still lived in the United Kingdom, would you be a YouTuber? And there are many ways I could look at that. I've always been a curious person, so I think I'd have a lot to add to the content areas of British life, space exploration, and the life and times of Christopher Lloyd. But I think moving to the United States did help to propel within myself a kind of entrepreneurial spirit. Living here sort of lit a fire under my optimistic side, and it said, "You can do this, boy. I believe in you. One day you will be president." And I had to have a word at that point. And so I think that, coupled with the earlier goodwill that I mentioned that Americans afford to Brits such as myself, really helped me get this channel off the ground. And, you know, if it goes much higher, it might become about space exploration. So all that to say, I've zero regrets. I'm glad that I stayed on an extra year in Lancaster. I'm glad that my wife never went to India, even though she's always wanted to see the Taj Mahal. I'm glad that we got married because, well, I'm glad that we got married. But I'm also glad that we moved to the United States of America and that this is not a sequel to Sliding Doors. That's it for this episode. I'm Lawrence Brown. You can follow me on Twitter at LostInThePondUS, and don't forget to subscribe so that my videos don't get lost in the pond. A significantly large shout out to all of my patrons who make these videos possible. If you would like to become a patron of Lost in the Pond, you can do so at patreon.com/LostInThePond. Until the next video, goodbye.